we're going to talk about how to read a research paper. And, you really don't have to be a scientist to think critically. And I think that's an important concept. So it's, I'm going to start with, I always like to tell people, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about some general pointers about reading a paper. What are the sections of a research paper? What can you expect when you get to a research paper? And then step by step, what you should do. So first thing, think critically. You can think critically. Any one of us can. Don't assume that the authors are correct. Don't assume that everybody's perfect. And if you get published, it must be right. Ask questions. I love that everybody's asking questions here. And that's what you have to do when you read. And think about whatever the paper is, are the investigators asking the right question? Are they solving the right problem? And are they approaching it in a logical way and making reasonable assumptions? Whoop. There we go. Read it creatively. What was good about the paper? What are some of the good ideas? And can it translate to other areas? Take notes. It's always good to take notes. I don't know what your textbooks look like in high school and college. Mine had all this stuff on the margins and all this highlighting. In fact, people used to tease me like, what isn't highlighted? But, take notes and underline, include, in the margins, questions, criticism, so that you can go back to them. You think you're going to remember, but you won't. So underline your key points and include your questions. Mark what you think is most important, and also what you really want to come back to because you don't understand it or it's questionable. And after you read anything, it's important that you can summarize it, because that means you really understood it. And it helps to, solidify that information in your mind. And identify what things you may want to go back to. Ooh, I don't quite remember that part, or let me go back to that background and understand it better. And, consider looking at those references that are provided, because it can give you more information about the background and more of an understanding of what's going on. And also help you to understand, did this study add to what we know? Did it push the envelope? What did it contribute? And, yeah, it's going to be slow at first, but, like everything, it gets easier as you do it. And so then let's start with, what are the sections of a research paper? Well, we have an abstract, an introduction, methods, results, conclusion, discussion, and the references. So what's the abstract? That's actually a summary of the paper. It highlights the main question. It should at least give a sentence of background so you understand why the investigator was asking the question. It highlights the question. It presents the main results. It may have a sentence or two about what the method was, and it gives you an overview of the conclusions. And we're going to talk about later how you approach this step by step. Many people jump to the abstract and read that first. You should read it last, and we'll talk about that. The introduction is really important because it sets the stage. It's the foundation. It tells you, hey, here's what's gone on before. And, it made me ask this question, and it outlines why the investigator is doing the study. What's the basis for the question he's asking? The methods tell you about how he's going to answer the question. What's the design of the study? How will the experiment be carried out? And you've heard something, you've heard a lot about design from Eric. How do you design a good study to get rid of some of the issues that can muddy the waters in terms of your conclusions? And, you want to eliminate bias, confounding features. And are the methods going to do that? You want to look at the results. So what was found? What was the data? And how are they interpreted? And the conclusion should also put the results in the context of what's been known and what it adds. And also, I think a really important feature of conclusions is, okay, where do we go from here? What's the next step? What's the unknown? And also should talk about, here's the weaknesses of this study, or here's what you have to consider when you consider these conclusions. And the references, again, can provide backup, and you should always think about looking up those references if you're interested in a particular area. So how do we do it now? Okay, we know the sort of an overview. We know the parts of a paper. Okay, I've got a paper sitting in front of me. What do I do? Well, when you read, look up the words you don't know. Remember, Google and Wikipedia are your friends. It's okay to look up words and try to understand. Take notes, overline, and reread if you're not sure. Start with the introduction. This presents your supporting background, right? Lays the groundwork, should identify that big question. What's the problem and how important is it in the field? And it should logically go directly to what the question is. It should lead you right to, yeah, I'd ask the same thing. And, you want to know, are the investigators making logical arguments? Does it make sense? Does A go to B, go to C? And make sure before you move on that you can summarize the background and the questions being asked. And think about, what's this going to add to everything? Then you read the methods and identify, how are they answering the question? Is this a good design? Is it likely to give me valid results? Is it going to be one person taking an herbal versus one person not? Is it 20? Is it controlled? Are we going to just say, do you want this herbal, and separate groups by asking people if they want it or not? Or are we going to try to do it in a randomized fashion? You want to try to sort of scope out the experiment, make a diagram of the experiments and the trial. And in the case of clinical trials, you want to look at the study and control populations. Were they equal? Was it randomized? How was safety measured? How was the medication dosed and given? How was efficacy measured? And how were the results analyzed? And those are some of the things. And then you read the results, look at the figures and tables. That's where the meat is. Oftentimes the major results are going to be in the tables and the figures. And you want to know, when you're done reading the results, did you get the answer? And in clinical trials, when you look at the results, were safety issues considered? Did the intervention work? Was there statistical significance? And now you know what that p-value is. Can you reject the hypothesis that there was no effect? The null hypothesis. And then you finally read the conclusion discussion section. And, sometimes they call it conclusion, sometimes discussion, and this should interpret the results. And do you agree with the way an investigator interprets the results, or would you come up with something different? Can you think of another way to look at it? And does the investigator tell you what the possible problems are with the data, and put it in the context of what's been known before, what's gone before? And how does a study add to knowledge? And I always like to know, what's the next step? What do you think should be done? And then finally, the references, of course, that we talked about. Now read the abstract. And was this an accurate summary of what you just read? So, and final comments are, don't be afraid to jump into the literature and be an informed consumer. Learn to be critical and creative. Use that pencil, use the highlighter, write in the margins, think about what you're reading. Just because you don't have a PhD after your name doesn't mean you can't think and you can't read critically and be as knowledgeable as anyone else. Ask questions, and with practice, it will become easier. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about our stem cell paper, and we're going to do our breakout to answer some of the questions. Now I have the questions up here in the breakout group. I think everybody, do you have your questions? Does everybody have a copy of the questions in the paper, the stem cell paper? Yes, it was sent, I think it was, yeah, okay, good. So, look, you get through what you can, and, we'll come back in about 20 minutes or, at say 10 o'clock, after the breakout, and then we'll go over the answers. And I think that, it's just sort of practice on reading a paper. And, I think that everybody will enjoy that. So I'm going to stop the share for now. And we're going to put people in groups, and you guys can work together on answering the questions.